Okay, so welcome, guys, to another episode of I Am Dharma Talk. Today, my guest is Mike Floyd. Mike is one of the youngest ever elected officials on a school board.
Yes.
And you're also the one of the youngest people elected as
The treasurer of the Texas Democratic Party.
treasurer of the Texas. So that's like pretty amazing.
It's been fun. It's been interesting. It's as a young person to see actually how government and how politics works from that perspective is incredible. So it's been fun so far.
So the reason I asked you to come on when I had texted you, it's to talk about the school shootings.
Yeah.
Because it seems like, several times a year we have these, kids going to school with guns and shooting or, and all of that. And so as someone that graduated from high school not that long ago, you have a dual perspective, right? Because you're on a school board and you are a student.
Right.
And this is something that I think really affects kids in school now that people my age never had to worry about.
Well, and that was the whole selling point when we originally ran was we get that's for the first time in a long time, if ever, in Texas at least, bringing that student perspective to actual policy decisions. So yes, I mean, when it comes to school shootings, not just understanding, okay, how do we coordinate with police and, campus hardening, which is what most school districts are doing now, but also how do we incorporate more mental health initiatives for students in schools who are feeling every day threatened and scared of what might happen, right?
Has there, when you were talking about strengthening the school, what did you call it?
So it's campus hardening.
Campus hardening. What does that mean?
So that's been the long-term, last 20-year approach to making our schools safer from external threats, right? So that means bulletproof film on windows to prevent them from shattering so some guy could come in, right? It means security vestibules, which are bulletproof reception areas in which people have to come in and then get buzzed in again.
Yes.
Right? So it's more like an airport than a school.
Yeah.
But if it continues at the pace that it's going, it won't be like an airport, it'll be like a prison, right? So that's the line that we're drawing right now is how do you keep schools safe but still maintain the traditional school environment in which people can, it's relaxing and educational, right? But that's the focus. But yeah, hands down, the top priority right now for school districts is how do you keep students alive in schools? Because you're right. I mean,
because if it's a student at the school,
right? So then that's the missing part, right?
Yeah.
So if you're protecting from external threats, what happens when you have an internal threat?
Correct.
And that's been the missing puzzle piece: is how do you solve, your Columbine shooters being students, your Virginia Tech being a student, your Texas famous
Santa Fe
school shooting, Santa Fe very close to home, being a student, right? And then of course, how do you catch that before it happens?
Yeah.
Right? How do you track every student? How do you know which students to track? And then if you find a student that is in a troubling circumstance, what do you do? What's the proper approach?
Okay.
And so that's been the jigsaw puzzle that no one's been able to figure out yet.
And so when we hear things on the news about, the teachers should go get trained to use guns and have guns in the classroom, what discussions are you hearing about that?
Well, I mean, there's obviously it's a very partisan topic. The vast majority of even Republicans who I deal with are opposed to the idea.
Yeah.
Because essentially what you're doing is, for lack of a better phrase, you're putting a Band-Aid on a very big bullet wound, right?
Yeah.
And it's essentially what you're saying is we are anticipating this to continue, and instead of trying to solve this at the root of the problem, we're just going to add another element of violence into the equation, right?
Yeah.
And it makes no sense. Even teachers will tell you, teachers who are trained with firearms, that bringing more guns on the campuses make them less safe than more safe, right?
Yeah.
So that's most districts in Texas, that's not happening.
Okay, good.
But under the governor's plan, which he published, I think, late last year, he calls for a Marshall program in which certain teachers have firearms on campuses, and they would actually give us funding for that. So instead of funding for guns, we ask for funding for counselors, mental health services. That's a better way of approaching the problem.
It is. And just because that's my area, you know, I think that mental health care should start at the elementary school level and continue, because often by the time, you know, a kid is 14, 15, there has been trauma all along the way, you know, but that's when we're emboldened because maybe we're bigger than, you know, when you're in second grade, what are you going to do? Right. But in high school, you know, and teenagers already think they're invincible. Yeah. But anyway, so I'm really like that y'all are wanting more mental health.
Well, you're right. I mean, just before we get away from how impressionable young children are, and this is true for anything, right? You look at racism, right? I mean, that's the famous example. If you go into a classroom in elementary school, you already start seeing the foundations being laid. The fact that black children are 4 or 5 times more likely to be punished for the same offense that a white kid commits, right? And this is
harsher punishment.
Punishments, but this is in elementary school, right? And that's the foundation of that, and then you can see how it grows and evolves. Same is true with, obviously, I'm not an expert on mental health, but I assume, you know, during that, even from infancy, right? You have these things happening that contribute, at least. And that's the great problem with solving for this type of offense, this violent act, is there are thousands of variables that go into each student. And each person that commits this crime has a combination of those variables, but they're different. And so trying to solve for all of them is very hard to do, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't attempt the effort, right?
Because it may be that maybe you get 75% of issues addressed, because we're always going to have the outliers for you know what I mean? Like, look, so far the school shooters have not been black kids, right? And so I think no one's really, few people are talking about that.
Right.
You know, that
young white men.
They're young white males. Typically, and so there's something brewing going on that I know you can't speak for that, but I'm just curious if that ever comes up in school board meetings or any of that, because yes, there are racial issues. We have more black people in prison. Right. More Hispanic people in prison. So there's a lot of emphasis now on prison reform. Right. That I love. But I'm curious what we're missing.
Yeah. Well, and the same is true about where these attacks are occurring. Right? They're not occurring in your impoverished areas, right? They're happening in your well-to-do, affluent suburbs. Right? So Columbine, Parkland, I mean, these are all white, relatively white communities in which, you know, there's not a financial struggle for everybody, right? For the majority. There's still people there struggling for sure, but it's not common. So you're right. I mean, the question is, do we approach that issue of solving this issue? Sorry. The way that we approach attempting to solve or at least mitigate the frequency of school shootings has to be done with the full facts. And the facts right now are, at least, you know, I don't think there's ever been on record a young black woman commit one of these crimes, right? And so you have to take that in context,
that I know of,
right? Right. And it's not the stereotypical, I mean, frequency. If you look at what's happening, I mean, it's very clear to tell. The question is it limited to young white males, right? And I don't know if you can say it's limited to them. It's entirely possible that, especially if we look at other countries where these things happen, they're different people. But something in America culturally is happening, where, you know, young men, particularly who are white, have a feeling that they need to do this, or that they have a justification for these types of crimes. And as you're seeing, you know, the political environment become more turbulent, especially with the influx of white nationalist political rhetoric, you're seeing this happen everywhere across the world. I mean, New Zealand just happened, and you saw the manifestos.
But New Zealand acted
very
right
quickly,
away, you know, and yes, they're a smaller country. They don't have the Second Amendment, but they still acted so swiftly as a nation.
Well, they also don't have the lax lobbying rules that we have. I mean, the influx of money into our political system, I've seen it firsthand. is a problem. I mean, not just with regard to guns, but anything.
So say more about that, because I think as a layperson with the political world, and many people don't know what goes on behind the scenes when you say the lobbying.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, so I mean, famously, the NRA, National Rifle Association, spends millions of dollars lobbying for specific legislation that enshrines parts of the Second Amendment into modern law. But also what they do is, and this is the more impactful part, is that they go and give money to candidates who are running on their platform, right? Or who incorporate something, right? So they'll throw $30,000, depending on the size of a race, a couple $1 million into supporting or backing one candidate.
Who will support the NRA agenda?
Who is just intrinsically, their candidate.
Okay.
I mean, it's not like they're picking people to run, but then they send questionnaires that I've received them. NRA questionnaires from the NRA saying, do you support this, 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 and this? Mail it back to us, right? I don't fill out those forms because I don't need to, but I know people who do, and then they receive financial contributions, especially at the school level. The school district level, there's actually NRA money coming in to prevent school districts from advocating for parents to lock up their guns, keep them away from their children, to go through a what we call like a gun safety class for parents. That is effectively lobbied against even at the school board level. So it affects every level of government from the White House on down.
So this is very upsetting. Like, you're saying that, I'm actually shocked.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that anyone would not want training, locking up guns, because the people that are most likely to get hurt are the kids in those homes.
Right.
So it's parents not no parent wants that to happen.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I don't know, this is...
It's same thing that happens when we talk about sexual health, right? It's a quote unquote none of your business, right?
Yes.
For any governing body, including a school, to teach kids about their bodies or to tell them what to do with their guns, right?
Yeah.
And God, right? So
you can't tell them what to do with their bodies, but we can rule against women being able to do what they want?
That's at a much higher level. So
Okay.
what they're saying is a lot of these NRA folks don't want schools to tell parents
sexual health.
what to do
I
with
see.
their guns or sexual health, right? So
Okay.
sexual health being, that's a private issue that we deal with in our home. We
Yes.
don't want anyone telling my kid about
Birds and the bees.
Sure.
Okay.
Right. And so that kind of mentality leads to things like this where
Yes.
we can actually save lives
Yes.
just by the Santa Fe shooter here just down the road from us got his gun from his dad's closet, right? Because it was laying there,
Yeah.
And if that gun had been properly stored, locked up, that incident may not have happened, or it would have been harder for that perpetrator
Yes.
to commit the crime, right? And so instead, when we're not allowed to tell communities what we really need help with, these acts continue to happen because the biggest part, school districts, we can harden our campuses, we can put bulletproof film, we can put metal detectors up, but if people have access to these kinds of weapons, it's going to continue to happen.
Well, and it may not happen on campus, but as people are leaving campus,
Sure.
and outside of the physical structures,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Right.
Where does it stop? Like
Right.
everyone goes around in a bulletproof outfit,
Right, or everyone has a gun, right?
Or
And that's
everyone has
the
a
other
gun.
alternative, right?
Yeah,
So,
the Wild Wild West.
Right.
Okay, so you had done some work on. There was a specific child, I think, a student, who was not able to use the bathroom of her choice.
Yeah. So Kai Shapley.
Yes.
She was a 5-year-old little girl in kindergarten, and she could not use the restroom that she wanted to use because it didn't match her
sex.
The sexual gender, her gender identified by her birth certificate.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So she had transitioned very early. Knew it apparently. When she was 3, 4, 5, began living herself. And the school district essentially said, absolutely not. This is not something we do here in Pearland. And the superintendent of schools actually said that if we allow this kid to use the restroom that she needs to use, pedophilia and polygamy would surely be next, right? Pedophilia being
Yes. Sex with children.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the kind of relationship that
Okay.
I was getting into when I ran for office, and it was very clear from early on that, this is more about civil rights. That if you allow this child to be discriminated, it opens the door for all types of discrimination. We've seen that before.
Yeah.
And if you looked at the rhetoric that they were using, dehumanizing her and really demonizing her, it's the same rhetoric that was used against all different types of people throughout American history and in world history. And so it was very important, I think, to have drawn that line, just as a moral principle of mine. Just there has to be a unconditional equality between people, regardless of who they are, right? And we won the election, which people were not expecting us to win, especially down there.
Because you were a
Pearland.
senior in high school.
I was a senior in high school.
You had turned 18.
I turned 18 in September. I was running in February.
Okay.
And I was challenging a 47-year-old two-term incumbent.
Wow.
Right, and this is not, the liberal bastion of Pearland doesn't exist, right? So it was more of a principled stance, and I'm glad that the community supported that effort. But since then, that child unfortunately had to move out of Pearland because they still would not allow her to use the restroom that she needed to use.
Wow.
Yeah.
What might got you interested in social change? So how would you term your sort of, because I think for a lot of, because you were a teenager then,
right?
Just the sense that you actually could change something.
Yeah, I mean that's hard to pinpoint. I mean, again, we talked about how factors from
because your family's very politically
aware.
Active.
They're very aware. My dad's run for office, but I was already 17 at the time. I'd been involved before. I think it's just a combination of maybe having a big family and disagreeing with each other and arguing. And trying to find ways to solve problems.
To win the arguments.
To win the arguments and to make the house better. I don't know. Right? No, I think that our generation, you look across the board, is very, very active. The Parkland kids being one example. There's a big climate change movement going on across the country and across the world, really, led by young people. And so I think that there's just this overwhelming sense of that we don't have the luxury to wait anymore. We can't sit on the sidelines. That there's a call to action right now that's dire, and it's in a lot of different areas. It's not just climate, but it's guns, school safety, it's equal rights, it's criminal justice reform. There's just a lot of fights to fight right now, and it's seems to only be getting worse.
It does. How much for? I guess you're considered Gen Z. I'm not exactly sure, who's what, but how, not that you're the spokesperson for your generation, but just from your peers. What are the conversations about? What keeps coming up over and over?
You mean in regards to like politics?
Just the world,
Well, I mean, I think that obviously in the last week and a half, abortion has been a huge issue. And you see people from across even the political spectrum agreeing that what's happening right now is a deliberate effort to undermine a core part of the Constitution, which has been founded and has been founded again by the court and by lower courts to be constitutional. That's been a big one. I think that there's just, again, a lot of different varieties of issues to solve that you have people can find their own, and so you have a very diverse group of people. Our generation is the most diverse ever to be in this country, talking about a multitude of different things, right? So there's no longer a mainstream culture for young people anymore. There's no MTV anymore, really. I mean, you have these very specific groups, and YouTube has been a huge part in doing that. I didn't know for a while that there's something going on with James Charles. I had no idea. And then apparently my younger sister knew all about it, and then I became aware of it, and there's just this large volume of people who know about it, but it's isolated. And so it's hard to get a unified movement of young people. I think that's been a challenge. Maybe it's not like the 60s, where there was a unified movement where the young people were on the same page. But we have kind of divided our power into different little areas to focus on.
It's interesting you say that because, the beauty for your generation is you were born and the internet was already there. As opposed to my generation, We had 3 TV channels.
Right.
So everyone knew, we related to each other based on, we all knew the same shows
Sure.
and, whatever. And your generation, as unified as it can be with information dissemination,
It's very fragmented.
it's very fragmented. So that's interesting.
When it breeds a problem,
Yeah.
and this has been something that's been very relevant, especially in the 2016 election, is that because of the diversification of news sources,
Yes.
right? Because of the
Yeah.
spread of technology, I
Yeah.
mean, you can get your own personal preferred news, right? I mean, I subscribe to a couple of different news sources that I typically agree with. I typically find to be reasonable. And then there are people on the other side who think my sources are junk,
Yes.
And so what that does is it leads to alternate realities,
Yeah.
right? Where James Charles is a big deal for one person,
Yeah.
to other people it might be school safety or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
it may be, right?
Yeah.
So then there are alternate realities, and then people are voting based on their own reality. What's fact is not truly fact anymore.
Yes,
It's opinion.
In psychology, we call that confirmation bias.
Yeah.
That when we believe something, we pay more attention to the things that support our beliefs.
Right, exactly.
The information, laws, news, anything, whatever. I mean, we can see it, the difference between Fox and MSNBC.
Yeah,
Both
stark,
are kind
yeah.
of like completely different information about the same thing.
Right.
And if you're bet a certain way, you're going to watch either and say, oh, yeah, see?
Well,
I'm right.
and so, I
Yeah.
mean, as it pertains to school safety, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you watch Fox News when something's happening, the focus is much more on the heroic actions of the police. Not saying that they're not heroic, but if
Right.
you watch an MSNBC, it'll be more about the victims. It'll be more about,
Gun control.
Gun control, right? I mean, figuring out how do we finally put an end to the madness of school shootings.
Yeah. I want to come back to the school shooting part because it's devastating for the families and the communities.
Yeah.
And also for anyone who has kids in school.
Right. Yeah.
Because now, in elementary school, if you're learning to hide under your desk, and it's not because there might be a tornado.
Right.
It's because one of your classmates
Right.
or grown-up can come in and kill you.
Yeah, no, it's terrifying. They're teaching us to hide, fight, and then hide, run, then fight, right? So the 3 things that I've been taught since elementary school was that if something's happening, hide first. If you can run and need to run. And if those 2 options aren't available, then prepare the defense, right?
Okay.
And I remember even in high school talking to classmates, once you got comfortable with the class dynamic and you knew everybody, the conversation that came up several times was, okay, if something happens, what do we collectively agree that we're going to do, right? And that's something that people have never had to deal with before.
Correct.
And going back to the problem of variability with these situations, if we were going so far detailed as, what if he had a shotgun, a machine gun, an assault rifle? What if it was a guy with a knife? We had these scenarios planned out. And that's not common, and that's not unique to my school, right?
Yeah.
That's everywhere now.
Yeah.
And so you have these young people who are instinctively looking for security in any position that they're in, whether it's in school or at a concert or in a movie theater, right?
Yes.
It's how do I get out of here if something bad happens?
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know the mental implications of that.
Well, I'll tell you. So what happens when we are hypervigilant?
Right.
The part of the brain that is responsible for us surviving, the life and death part of the brain, is the amygdala, which we put, we know fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
Are the responses to fear because the brain senses that your life is in danger. Even though the brain hasn't changed very much at all from our ancestors, having to run from tigers
Sure.
and stuff like that. So in present day, for students to learn, they cannot have the hypervigilance turn on because that part of the brain does not allow for anything other than what's going to be life or death.
Right.
That's it. So if you're in a classroom or at a concert or at a football game, in a movie theater, and you're so focused on, are you safe? If danger comes, where do I hide? The brain cannot take in and learn information. We creativity is blocked, executive functioning is blocked, memory is blocked. We go into such overdrive, and that's, there are schools of thought on parenting, but we know that inducing fear in a child doesn't teach the child. It's not helpful, as far as discipline and all of that. Same thing goes, all the neuroscience is showing this, that when that part of your brain comes on, because the number one thing, its job is to keep you alive,
right,
and procreate so the species can go on. So if that part of us is activated, no other learning happens. That's where all the blood, if you do functional MRIs and scans, you'll see that the blood flow is only going to the to your stem and emotional brain, but focused on fight or flight.
Okay, it's just like an
how am I going to
instinctual,
save my life? It's
natural
instinctive.
response.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. It's like a dog or cat. They're going to first fight to be alive.
Right.
Unless they're trained otherwise to keep you alive.
Right.
So this is the part, I think, the mental health component of it. In the discussions politically, in a broader sense, don't talk about, if we want our kids to learn and be smart,
Right.
we can't have hypervigilance, at the same time. Like, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And so if we're not, because now safety training is just part of life for school kids.
Yeah.
We have to put something in there, like meditation at school, or more recess, which we're doing less recess,
Right.
more art and music, and some of these other things that help to balance, healthy food in the cafeteria. Because with junk food, we know it affects our brain. We know it affects our health. And there's so much power I think the political system has to really spread information that every single family member can know and try to do, not only in their homes, but with their kids and neighbors' kids and all of that.
Yeah, no, the big thing, and this is true for any program or initiative, the end goal, the absolute perfect solution that I think for internal threats, not external threats, but internal threats, would be, kids having counselors with them from K through graduation, right?
Yeah.
And that each child would regularly visit that counselor and create a relationship, and a counselor being trained to figure out these certain signs that might lead to a problem. The problem with that is, and the problem with meditation in schools, the problem with extending recess, is that you have a lot of red tape where schools are now being measured by the minute, that students have to get X number of educational minutes in a day for a year, right? And so that means recess doesn't count, lunch doesn't count, meditation probably wouldn't count under the Texas law. So you've got to change that. And then you've got to secure the funding to hire enough counselors in order to have that kind of long-term relationship.
Because generally there's one school counselor.
There's one school counselor, and they've also got to create the schedules for everybody, right? And then what you have to do is actually you have to increase the number of psychologists in the field, clinical psychologists in the field, right? Which would mean that the government would have to incentivize or create a fund for people to go to school and then come and work in schools, right? And so that's, expensive. But everything is expensive, right? We just have to prioritize. Do we want to save lives? Is the sanctity of life as important as some people say it is? Once
a child is born.
Is that the case? And then if so, it shouldn't be a matter of money that holds us back from saving lives.
Because we spend on what we value. I mean, if we look at what we're spending on, that's showing our nation's values,
Right.
our state's values, and so on down
Yeah.
the road. There was something recently, the SAT, there was a conversation about the SAT exam now counting for
Yeah, so
socioeconomic.
So they're not going to be accounting for individual incomes.
Okay.
What they're going to be doing is they're accounting for the community that you come from, the crime rate, and I think the overall per capita income, right? So on average. So if you're a rich person who comes from a very poor place, you will be measured the same as your peer, right?
Yeah.
So I think that they've got to really make sure that people don't abuse the situation. You don't want somebody coming in who can afford to buy an apartment in a poor part of town just to put that on their registry. But essentially what it is, the SAT, and I think it's going to be moving to other tests soon, they're going to be starting to account for the factors of life, which I think is a great move.
Yes.
And it's long overdue.
Yeah. You're right. When I first heard it, I hadn't thought about what you just said, that it's based on the community and not the individual.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, well, that's great. We know in the mental health community that if you grow up in high stress environment, which is usually unsafe, there's low income, low safety, all of that our learning is compromised, which goes back to the fight or flight, kids coming to school so stressed out because
and the immediate response was, this is just more affirmative action. But the SAT, the new grading system doesn't even account for the individual's race at all.
Yes.
So it just takes into account socioeconomic factors. So the problem is then you might be having a huge blind spot.
Yeah.
Because we know that a poor white person has a lot of more opportunities than a poor black person.
Absolutely.
Right. And so they've got to account for that. I think that they made a mistake in that.
Okay. So that is maybe a work in progress.
Yeah. No, for sure.
At least it's headed.
At least it's going in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to talk about is Dharma, or one's purpose, one's path. When did you know that your path included change making?
Well, I don't know. When does anyone know, right? I think it's different, right? In the fourth grade, I wrote a petition to change the school lunch policy in my school district.
Wow.
And it got a couple hundred signatures and went to 2 campuses of the 24 that we have, right? So it didn't do anything, and they laughed it off. But there was a very early call for fixing problems. I don't know where it comes from.
But excuse me.
It's okay. Need some more water?
I have my water, but
we can do a cut right here so you can have some time.
Yeah, that'll be good. Smell it. Where do you have to?
Nowhere. I'm good to go. I have an iftar to go to later, but iftar.
Yes, because it's
It's that season.
Ramadan. Give me a tissue. Sorry, I don't want to make you like my runner.
That's what we are.
Yeah.
Huh?
It needs to happen sometime.
Yeah. It's the role of the producer.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, when it was so nice, we did this workshop, and so I could tell them if I needed something in my little microphone because they had the headphones. I felt like, wow, this is amazing. I need to have people.
It's really weird.
When did you both start? Did you start at the same time, or did you come on differently?
I guess so.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was very recently, like in December or something.
No, it's not.
Beginning of December was when we first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have y'all met my sister Mia? Did they meet Mia?
They met Mia when I was getting my makeup done for the photo shoot. You were here.
I wasn't here.
Yeah, you weren't there. Yeah, yeah.
My mom met her too.
Yes, that's right. Your mom was here. Yeah, they've met Mia.
Okay.
She hasn't,
She hasn't met you.
but he has. But he was, you were setting up and stuff, so you didn't really get to talk
Right.
to her. Yeah. Mia's his older. He's a middle child of 5 kids.
Third of
Oh, wow.
5. So there's probably some psychology in that.
Well, that's why you have such a beautiful vantage point of your older siblings and your younger siblings, and each of them has a different personality. So for you being in the middle, you just, there's middle children are often very diplomatic. They know how to communicate to a lot of different people, and they're often called peacekeepers.
Well,
I know
I don't
you're
think
not
it
you're not
is.
quite
No.
that, but
no.
okay, I think I'm okay now.
No,
Okay.
No clap before you start again. That would be great.
Oh. So, Mike, what you had said something about learning at a young age, or noticing at a young age, change needed to happen.
Sure. Right.
What? Sorry, that's not the angle I want to take. So we'll do it again. When we do these podcasts, one of the things I like to focus on with Dharma is what someone's purpose or path is.
Right.
And you're so young to be, sort of as successful politically as you are, much more so than other 20-year-olds,
Sure.
I'm just curious that for you specifically, when did you feel that you could create any kind of change?
Yeah, no, so I mean, we tried, when I was in 4th grade, we wrote a petition to change the lunch system at our elementary school. And that was the first real, I think I was probably 8 or 9, right? So first real attempt to fix something that I was clearly wrong.
Okay.
There was an issue where kids who were on free or reduced meals would get, their lunches were horrendous, right? And so there was an effort to change that, and unfortunately didn't go anywhere in 4th grade. But when I was in 8th grade, we did the same thing again. But it was much bigger, much more successful, and there was actually a major change to district policy. So that was when 8th graders are 13, 14, right?
Yeah.
So that happened then. Years when I was in 11th grade, we were the most successful little movement in our schools was to change the dress code, and there was actually a major change as well. So
what was the dress code change?
the dress code change was just relaxing it a little bit more,
Okay, I
moving
see.
towards a little bit
I
more
see.
moderate
Yeah,
approach to punishment for violations,
Okay.
things like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, just simple, basic, but impactful, because every
Yes.
student is affected by a dress code.
Yes.
So I don't know at what moment exactly when I noticed that, change,
That you could
somebody
do
has
something.
to do something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's been a pretty consistent theme so far.
No, I mean, I don't know a lot of 8, 9-year-olds. I mean, I have an 8-year-old daughter,
Yeah.
and she's not talking at home about kids not getting good food.
Well, but she could lead a revolution if she.
Well,
she
okay,
was-
yeah.
She's
One
tough.
day, hopefully, yeah. But I just find that fascinating that you not only thought and felt a certain way, but you followed it with action.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was probably. I mean, I remember my mother actually asking me, "So what are you going to do about it?" I mean, that may have been a catalyst moment.
Okay.
But to bring up the issue, I think is something that needs to be done more often. Because you have people from all different types or walks of life, who have these opportunities to actually create change, who instead recognize a problem but never try and solve the problem.
So maybe there is this sort of, we talk about it in the mental health world of learned helplessness, or feeling that you don't have agency to create change. And I do think there are socioeconomic, racial, and all of those things that play a factor, but in every generation, there are people from seemingly, where they don't have equal access, but they're still able to create change. There was something in you. Yes, part of it was your mom saying at the right moment, what are you going to do about it?
Right. Yeah.
But you had to say to her, I don't, this isn't fair. Because for her to know that you didn't like something going on at school,
Right.
you communicated that.
Yeah,
you know?
I guess that's fair.
Yeah. So I'll just say that as a mom, that I know what my kid tells me.
Right.
And I'm not aware of which kids aren't treated well at school.
Right.
Well,
it's hard.
Yeah. So I really want to commend you on that. And I do think Gen Z is really more action oriented.
Yes, no, that's actually they've been doing studies on comparing millennials to Gen Z, and they've came to that same conclusion that you actually spoke about a couple minutes ago. Is that Gen Z was born into technology. Even millennials, they were born first, and then technology was introduced, and it wasn't, as you know, it wasn't like it is now, right?
Yeah.
You have a young daughter, and you see how good she is with technology, right?
Yes.
There's just an innate part of us that is focused on a much bigger scale than it was before, or than people were before.
Yes. And that's actually making me think about, when you can make your own video and post it, or, post your pictures or whatever, that there's already the concept of influence.
Yeah.
That I can get likes. So there's something about, if I put this out there, I can get a response, which may play into, I can do something about it. I'll post, I'll write, I'll do something.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that you see that, positive angle of social media. And then there's also this negative aspect to it, right?
Yeah.
And you see, if you go back, we're talking about social media, but school shooters, they consistently post before they do something.
Yeah.
We've been able to catch a number of people, even in my school district, who post beforehand, I'm going to do this tomorrow. These are my targets. And it's just amazing that they'll put that online. It's great because we could stop it from happening.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's also a vehicle for white supremacy, for hatred, for bullying online. Obviously, that has a different component to it. But there's this going back to the shooters. There's this feeling of they want you to know what they're going to do, and they want you to know that they did it.
Yeah.
That's why they publish these manifestos.
Yeah.
There's some ego behind it, whatever it may be.
Definitely, yeah. Well, that's a very valid point. That with anything,
right? No,
there are benefits,
sure,
and there, and I think parents and people have to be very curious about what their kids are doing on social media.
Right, and then where's the line, right?
Yes, because
difficult.
there is a very fine line.
Very difficult.
And it's very tough to police that.
Right.
I can see where, for law enforcement or any groups that are trying to prevent the next school shooting,
right,
they have their work cut out for them, because kids can communicate anywhere. There's so many different outlets.
Right, and
and
as privacy becomes more of a concern for everybody, it's going to also allow that to happen. Right now, what we have technology that scans all of social media. So we have actually technology that will find the social media profiles of every single student in our school district, and it'll monitor those accounts, the public aspects of those accounts, of course, for keywords that typically are found in manifestos or declarations of intent to go and do something. And using that software, we found, again, just a number of people and caught it, sometimes just in time. But that's the other side of social media that is really important to stress, which is even a lot of these students who we catch are joking about it, right? There's no room for humor when it comes to threats anymore. And when beforehand, you could conceivably get away with something like that. Nowadays, it's off the no way. And maybe that's the downside of an overall good thing. I don't know how you would, if that saves lives. Of course, awkward 15-minute conversation and a slap on the wrist is much more preferable to a school shooting, without a doubt.
So what are you doing? Oh,
I'm so sorry. Right now is the perfect time to tell you. It's about 10 minutes till 4. Letting you know.
Oh, okay. So to cut it?
No, I'm just letting you know.
Oh, okay. So what are you up to now? You're in college.
Yeah, so I'm graduating in a year. So in May.
Congratulations,
Thank
yeah.
you. I'm excited.
What are you studying? I can
Political science.
Political science,
Yeah,
of course. Okay.
Missed the psychology department.
Uh-huh.
But I'm actually training for the LSAT right now, so that's my
I see.
focus.
Okay.
And then law school will be the next step. So in October, I take my test. Yeah.
Oh, so you're having to study most of this summer.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find a paying job because school board doesn't pay, and
Yes.
the treasurer's position doesn't pay. So
Okay.
I do a lot of work for free, which is worthwhile, but
Yeah. Yeah.
when it comes to paying rent or paying the bills or whatever, it's difficult.
And would I say you have like constituents? Do you have constituents?
Yeah, I've technically.
Okay.
Yeah, I have roughly 165,000 constituents,
Oh.
22,000 students.
And so if any of our listeners or viewers want to contact you or kind of read up on you, or who knows, maybe one day vote for you.
Yeah. And,
how can people find you?
yeah, easy. They can just Google Mike Floyd followed by Pearland, and or I can just give them my email. floydm@pearlandisd.org.
Okay.
That's the one I check the most.
Okay.
I'm on social media, so
Okay.
not invisible. It's
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
easy
yeah,
nowadays to
yeah,
find people.
And so if you had given, the 20 years you've lived and what
Yeah.
you've seen, if you had, the top 3 concerns or things you would want to change, what would they be?
Well, I think education reform is huge. I think that we're really falling behind because the way that we're teaching kids is the same way that we've been doing for 200 years now.
Yeah.
And if you look at advanced, Scandinavian countries, China, even parts of India, and a lot of Europe, they're quickly moving beyond our
Ahead of us.
capacities.
Yeah.
And worldwide tests show that we're falling behind and falling fast.
Yes.
So instead of teaching to the test, the standardized testing, we need to be teaching towards a more applicable way of learning, which is more based in prudence. The ability to actually act on what you learn instead of regurgitate and forget.
Yes.
I think that's huge, and I think encompassed in education is this vast area of mental health that the majority of Americans have no idea about.
Yeah.
That they don't teach in school.
Yeah.
I was thinking on the way over. Every year of my education, there was a physical education component, PE, right? You had to learn about your body. And today, there's still standardized testing for PE, where you have to run X number of laps,
Yes, yeah,
right?
yeah.
The PACER test.
Yeah.
There is nothing like that for mental health.
No.
There's no education about it. There's no standard for it. I'm not an expert, so I don't know if there could be a standard for it. But again, I think that there needs to be counselors for every student. And a relationship with that counselor for as many years as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's vital. The second one I think is climate change. That's coming. We here in Houston know it best.
Yes.
And it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
Minor thunderstorms now are causing street flooding everywhere.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be a huge problem for us because the 2% 2 degree threshold that was agreed upon in the Paris Climate Accord, it doesn't look like that's going to happen because it would
Okay.
require 15% reduction in carbon emissions every year, and that number does not look, or rather, that initiative is not supported by the current administration, and hopefully will be for the next one, but we'll see. The third issue I think is more abstract. It's more cultural. I think that people need to get more active in government and be persistent about a single issue.
I see.
You find this is the most effective way to get stuff done is to focus on 1 or 2 issues at a time
Yes.
and deliver on those issues, right? Famously, the Obama administration passed the Affordable Care Act, and actually Obama himself said, we're not going to take on immigration, we're going to punt that to the next Democrat, we're going to focus on healthcare. Because he knew that he couldn't get both done, right? And you see the exact opposite with this administration. They're trying to do so many different things, building a wall, going to war, tariffs. None of them are actually getting done. Right.
Yeah.
Aside maybe the taxes, right? They got that done. And it wasn't even what they intended to do, right? So, I mean, persistence on a single issue in government goes a long way. You see that right now actually with school safety. I mean, Moms Demand Action is a massive group now that is solely focused on writing new gun laws, and you're seeing the decline of the NRA. You're seeing, students step up everywhere. pushing for these reforms. And the pressures, even here in Texas. I mean, you
Yes.
have reasonable legislation now getting through committees, which even 2 years ago would have been a fantasy for people. So,
Well, I think we saw that with Beto O'Rourke getting
Yeah.
so close
so close, yeah.
to defeating Ted Cruz, because there was such a the 2016 election, I think, was a turning point
Yeah.
for a lot of us that sort of sat back
Right.
and
Right.
thought that the right thing would continue to happen,
Yeah.
and then when it didn't, many of us felt so disenfranchised by the results. At least for me, it really focused, and I hear it a lot from my clients, from friends and family, that's what sort of pushed them to get involved, to get out and vote.
There's an awakening.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was an awakening.
I think you had over 50% of people vote in the midterm election,
Yeah.
which hasn't happened, I think, in a generation or two.
Wow.
Right? And so you just have this extreme level of activism, largely on one side, which
Okay.
is interesting to see, that there were so many people who could have been involved, who could have prevented what's happening from happening. But the awakening is great, and it's going to have profound effects. But if we to keep that up, right?
Yes.
That should have been going on regardless of
Yes.
who's in office or what
Yes.
party is in control, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and those are the three areas I think that
you would
I'm
really
most passionate about.
Okay.
That if we could fix those things, you'd see a profound effect.
And then
for the better.
if there's something that my Generation X, and Generation X and baby boomers, I guess, what can we do to support Gen Z in, I don't know, encouraging them or...
Well, I think the main thing that I've run against myself is discouraging them, right? So not discouraging them. Let them prove their own merit. Don't write them off just because they might be young,
Okay.
right? Because oftentimes it comes back to bite
Yes.
the older folks, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
honestly. But if there's an awareness about the reality of things, about working together across generations to improve the future, keeping the future in mind, that maybe the baby boomers who,
Yeah.
don't have as long
Yeah.
on earth as the child born yesterday,
Yes.
keep that child born yesterday in mind when making decisions.
Yes.
That's very important.
Beautiful point.
Yeah.
Beautiful point. Mike, thank you for
Absolutely.
taking time out to come here. I really appreciate it. So, people can find you, they Google
Yeah.
you, all of that. Amazing topics and discussion today. This was great. So
Thank you for
thanks,
having me.
guys. I'll see you all next time. If you heard something today that resonated with you, please share in the comments or send us a review. If there's someone you know that could benefit or be impacted by our conversation, don't keep us a secret. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at I Am Dharma Talk. And our website is dharmawellness.org/I Am Dharma Talk. Until next time.